Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Welcome to This Medical Life podcast. These are the stories of medicine with Steve Davis and Dr. Travis Brown. This is the story of Burkitt Lymphoma. Dr. Travis Brown, for some reason we've got makeup people just putting makeup on us. There are lights everywhere. What's going on?
So this is an episode that reached back to a very old episode, actually, from going back to all the way to This Pathological Life. So this was, I had to look it up. This was episode 14, where we're reaching back into the archives. So we were contacted by a documentary maker. They contacted us because they had heard this episode, and it was the episode with Professor David Ellis. And this was looking back at Epstein-Barr virus. And this was the remarkable story. We'll have a quick recap because it's an amazing story. And it's a story of Dr. Denis Burkitt, who was out of the United Kingdom. He went to, it was Uganda at the time, working with the English there as part of colonial expansion, part of area. And he was working there in a hospital. He was a doctor. He saw some children with these large jaw tumours. Now they were disfiguring tumours. It was almost always fatal in these children. They would last a few months before they died. And he saw it once and he thought, okay, this is an anomaly, but then he saw it twice. Now, this was in the late 1950s. He saw it twice and he thought, there's something here that I need to investigate. Now, his whole history is quite remarkable. His father was in watching birds migrate and mapping them and everything. And Denis, I believe, also took that on. He then took it upon himself to map this condition across Africa, like even travelling across Africa. And what he found was there was a geographical distribution of this tumour, where these children would get this disfiguring jaw tumour around the neck or on top of the jaw, or a facial tumour. And it was just a devastating disease. And what he found was that there was a geographical distribution, that not only was it geographical, it also related to rainfall. And so there was a distinct line across Africa where you could mark top and tail of where these tumours were mapped out.
So was it occurring where there was more rainfall or less rainfall?
For higher the range. And so he ended up taking this information. They ended up calling it lymphoma. They had pathologists there. But he was trying to find the link. And then when he presented it at a lecture, there was someone by the name of Dr. Anthony Epstein who was in the lecture theatre and almost jumped out of his seat when he heard that there was a geographical distribution related to rainfall, because then he knew it had to be a biological basis. And so then that started the search, which would ultimately become the Epstein-Barr virus. But this really aggressive lymphoma, which was then later termed after Denis Burkitt as Burkitt's lymphoma, was found to be, there are different classifications. There's endemic, so this is areas that's related to these countries, but there's also in areas such as Europe and everything, they call it sporadic. So there's a little bit of different mechanism, but it's still related to Epstein-Barr virus. And so this is a remarkable investigative procedure that found that we now know as Burkitt lymphoma. And our documentary maker, who we're about to introduce, started delving into this when they were diagnosed with Burkitt lymphoma. And they have archival footage of Denis Burkitt talking about it. And it's just a remarkable show. They're going out to film festivals and putting this documentary, going to medical schools and displaying it. They got in contact with us, and I thought it was just going to be an amazing opportunity to talk to them about the footage that they've found.
Is Dr. Epstein in the footage as well?
Yes. There is an interview between these two people, Dr. Epstein and Dr. Burkitt. And not only that, there's one part that I really love about it, is it even goes to the point of talking about Olive Burkitt, who was there as well. At the end of the documentary, talks about her experience of her husband going out on these massive expeditions to find this, but she's at home in Uganda with her children. And so it really does put a balance on what scientific discovery means, and it puts a human side of what's at cost.
And you, Dr. Travis Brown, are saying this documentary is more gripping than Wicked. Is that true?
It could be. I haven't seen Wicked.
Éanna Mac Cana is a documentary filmmaker from Belfast in Ireland. Éanna has created his debut documentary feature-length film entitled Burkitt. This is about Dr. Denis Burkitt, an Irish doctor who was instrumental in finding the cause of what we now call Burkitt Lymphoma. The documentary includes never-before-seen archival footage of Dr. Denis Burkitt himself, discussions and interviews with Dr. Anthony Epstein, and the story of Olive Burkitt, Denis's wife. This is a deeply personal film for Éanna because he was diagnosed and treated for Burkitt lymphoma in 2017 and includes his journey as part of the documentary. Welcome to This Medical Life podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
What led you to develop a documentary on Dr. Denis Burkitt and the understanding of Burkitt lymphoma?
Well, in 2017, I was a filmmaking student at Manchester Metropolitan University, which is in England. I was approaching the end of that year when basically I'd noticed a lump at the back of my throat in one of my tonsils. Or swollen tonsil, really. I kind of put it out of my mind, and then the term finished up and I went back home to Belfast in Ireland just for the summer. Shortly after returning home, I noticed the tonsil, the swelling in the tonsil had gotten a little bigger. Again, I tried to kind of put it out of my thinking, and then but one day basically it started bleeding, and I went up to the emergency room. Over the course of that day, it eventually stopped bleeding. I was sent back home, and then 1 week later it started bleeding again. This time it basically didn't stop bleeding, and I went back to A&E. They took it a lot more seriously this time, and I got put through to emergency surgery, and they took the lump out. As I was in recovery from that, probably a number of weeks after surgery, I was called back into hospital, and was told that basically they had found this type of cancer called Burkitt's lymphoma in the tonsil. They had sent the tonsil back over to England and had it tested. So it was at that point, and this was probably now maybe late May 2017 or early June, that I was told that I was diagnosed with this type of cancer. First time hearing about it, of course. And yeah, things were moving pretty quickly, to be honest. Shortly after that, they began treatment. and I basically remained in hospital for that summer. It was pretty intensive treatment, so 3 cycles of chemo, which was kind of roughly for me, it was about three or 4 months in hospital as an inpatient, and then yeah, I got home, and then I think they did a scan in about, was it early October, and I, thankfully got the all clear from that, and basically had been in remission since. It was checkups for a while, but that was kind of, that's how I became aware of Burkitt's lymphoma, was through my own diagnosis of the cancer.
So when you were going through all of this, was there any other symptoms that you were having? Like, people will have asked you, did you have like night sweats or anything, or just this lump that just kept on getting bigger?
Just from memory, I think it was just the lump. I think I was quite fortunate, in relation to how it presents with other people, because I could actually see it. You could actually see the lump at the back of my throat in my tonsil. I know for a lot of people it can present in the abdomen, and it can grow to quite a, large size before it's, recognized or whatever, before anything happens. So I was kind of fortunate in that, in a sense that, I could see it, and also I guess it started, hemorrhaging, in the way that it did. But I can't remember having any other symptoms, to be quite honest. Maybe I did, but maybe I didn't connect them with the cancer. Yeah, I couldn't remember anything like that.
Now, when you were going through everything and the diagnosis came up, like a lot of people, when they first get the diagnosis, they hear something, but they hear cancer. Do you remember anything about that first conversation, about when they said you have Burkitt lymphoma, about what that meant?
I can't remember which part of the hospital I was in. I went up there with my girlfriend at the time, and my mum, and we were out in the waiting room. They called me in. I said I would just go in by myself, and I was told. And then, like, kind of one by one, my family and my ex-girlfriend came in, and they were told. So like I kept being told that I had this cancer. So but yeah, no, I certainly remember it, and it was obviously quite sobering. It was kind of, I suppose it was daunting at that time, because like earlier that year we had lost, like, my auntie had passed away from cancer, but a different type of it. When I was told, I was really naive about cancer. I didn't actually know too much about it. And basically, just being told that I had a cancer, I just associated, that word with kind of other experiences of, like, family members passing away from it. I didn't, they were all kind of the same thing to me, because I just didn't know too much about it. So yeah, no, it was definitely a memorable and kind of, I guess, like, sobering moment. Yeah.
Now, you spent 3 or 4 months in hospital. Now, this would have been completely, life-changing, because you've pretty much also go into isolation because some of the chemotherapy wipes out a lot of your immune system. How did you go with that kind of isolation and the effects of the treatment?
I felt I was okay. I had a great support system, and the people who were looking after me were great. My consultant was very good as well. So to be honest, I felt I had a great support system. I was taken great care of. They explained things very clearly to me. When I was in hospital, I never looked into Burkitt's lymphoma. I didn't want to know anything about it. The only thing I was told really about it was basically my dad had said that the guy who discovered it was from Fermanagh. My dad had done a bit of research about it, And my dad just told me don't look up anything to do with it. So I didn't, and I didn't really want to, and I never did in hospital or for the years following my discharge from hospital. But yeah, hospital was, it was difficult enough, obviously, and sometimes it could be quite frustrating being an inpatient. To be honest, it was kind of the cliche sort of experience of cancer, a lot of throwing up and hair loss and um, yeah, but it was okay. I think I handled it okay.
Looking back, do you wish you had have looked up more about Burkitt lymphoma while you were in hospital, or was your dad's advice sage, wise?
I think maybe it was wise for that, for being in hospital. I thought about this as well since making the film, because in researching about Burkitt's lymphoma and about Denis Burkitt, it started to really lessen that fear of this cancer. If I see those words nowadays, I don't, it doesn't spark or trigger any kind of anxiety in me. I wish I probably was kind of relieved of that fear maybe a little bit sooner. But I probably still would have needed time, I think, after hospital. But yeah, maybe a little bit closer to to being out of hospital could have helped my sort of mental state, because it was just always a trigger for fear and anxiety. Yeah.
What did finally make you say, I want to look into this more?
Yeah, it was a chance encounter, to be honest. So when I was discharged from hospital, the consultant told me I would have 5 years of checkups, and this kind of idea of like this 5 year shadow was like forged into my thinking, and it kind of overshadowed everything in those years after. So I was discharged in about September 2017. In I think it might have been maybe the summer of 2021, I had picked up a book in a charity shop just by chance, and it was called Irish Masters of Medicine. And I was flicking through it. I was just flicking through it, and there was just a chapter on Denis Burkitt, and it was that word Burkitt. The word itself is quite like sharp. I think it's got like this sharp syllable in it, the K. So it really sticks out. But for whatever reason that day, I decided to read it. I don't know why, but I decided to read it. It was on the first page that made me want to read more and find out more about that my cancer and Denis Burkitt, the guy who discovered it. Because basically on that first page, it described that the way Denis Burkitt mapped Burkitt's lymphoma across Africa was inspired by how his father mapped birds across County Fermanagh. And this was really interesting to me. I've always had an affinity for birds in particular, because my name in Irish means bird. So I just had this kind of, there was all of a sudden that fear was kind of replaced with like this moment of like comfort. And it was from that moment that I began researching. At the time, I had actually been funded to make a short film from Northern Ireland Screen, a separate short film. And I was meant to be making that. And I started researching into Denis Burkitt and Burkitt's lymphoma. And all my energy was spent researching into this. I started going over to London to the Wellcome collection, where Denis had basically donated a lot of personal archives. So I'd go into the rare materials room there and spend days there, going through all his documents and personal artifacts and photographs and everything. And the more research work I started to do on Denis Burkitt and the story of Burkitt's lymphoma, I was becoming more and more convinced that there would be some sort of project, and I managed to convince the funders of the short film to could I start to pursue making a short documentary on Denis Burkitt? Eventually, the short documentary, because there was just so much to the story, would turn into a feature film. So we managed to convince them again to fund, a bigger project, because there was just so much stuff. It was really overwhelming. But it was a very it was daunting and but also really exhilarating at the time, just finding out more and more, and just one link after another, one coincidence after another. It was very interesting.
I know Dr. Travis Brown wants to dive deeper into that, but I just need to insert a footnote. When you picked up a book, Irish Masters of Medicine, did Oscar Wilde's dad feature in there at all? Do you remember? Because we've covered him on this podcast before. He was a ear, nose and throat surgeon.
Right.
Do you remember if he featured at all?
If you give me 2 seconds, I might have the book at hand.
Yes, we'll pause. That's great.
Your faux pas on my behalf. Éanna, can I ask, if I've said his Dr. Denis Burkitt is from the UK, is that a major faux pas? Or is he Irish? Not. Because I think he went over with England, like it said, it's colonial.
It's a bit of a complex one, and it's hard to speak on his behalf because he's obviously no longer with us. But Denis did consider himself Irish, but the type of the Irish identity he would have had would have been more of an Anglo-Irish one. And he was actually born before partition. Right. So it was just there was a different kind of dynamic to it. It's kind of hard to explain.
Oh no! I know it's a minefield. I just know it's sort of one that I try to avoid.
Old Travis wants to know is, will he be stopped at border control when he's trying to enter?
I think it's like calling New Zealanders Australians.
Now let's reveal the big reveal from the Irish Masters of Medicine. Is Dr. Wilde there?
There is a William Wilde here. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
It's 1815 to 1876. Yeah. He's a few chapters before Burkitt.
The links we make.
I look forward to your documentary on him at some point.
Was there anything that surprised you when you were going through all this footage? I mean, I watched it and was just amazed at actually the quality of the image and the interviews that Dr. Denis Burkitt was giving. Was there anything that surprised you about what you found out about all of this?
Oh, yeah. It was just continuous surprises. I was surprised, first of all, that he had such an interest in photography. And when I discovered that, it was, a big relief because, making an archive documentary, you're obviously always actively looking for content. It almost actually got to the point when I started to find out he was interested in photography, it was actually a little overwhelming. There were so many photos to go through, and slides and films and interviews. It was great, but there was a lot of material eventually that I have to go through and scan and sort out. And then because sometimes the archive would require, getting permission from certain people or organizations, that itself was a bit of a minefield as well. Denis Burkitt, his interest in photography began very early when he was, I think, like a young teenager. He started taking photographs. Actually, ironically, after a surgery that he had, which happened in Belfast, he had lost one of his eyes in an accident, and then as a gift after that, he received a Kodak camera. I'm quoting my own film here, and basically started documenting. So his daughters always talked about how the camera replaced the eye that he lost, and it would be like a constant sort of companion for him in his life, and it helped obviously his medical work as well. He was a family man as well, so there was a lot of photos of family, and I was seeing a lot of images of his wife Olive, and a story kind of developed there as well from Denis's archives.
Now, you're doing film festivals at the moment with the documentary feature length. Is there a way that our audience listeners who are interested would be able to see some of this documentary online in the future?
Yeah, so at the moment I'm touring it across the Ireland and the UK at different festivals and cinemas and some medical universities as well. And then there will be a US premiere on the 28th of February, which is actually Denis Burkitt's birthday, in Washington, D.C. at the Capital Irish Film Festival there. And then there will be a European premiere in March at the In Science Film Festival. Will actually be the opening night film at that film festival. It's a big science film festival. But later in the year, we hope to basically have a TV cut on the Irish language broadcast network called TG Cahir, or TG4, as a lot of yous would read it. And it'll also be available online. I'm just not sure exactly what date it'll be broadcast on just yet.
Professor Jonathan Bond trained as a clinical haematologist in Ireland and completed laboratory research at UCL Institute of Child Health. He went on to do a PhD in molecular haematology at Imperial College, MRC Clinical Science Centre, now the London Institute of Medical Sciences, followed by a postdoctoral fellowship at the Hôpital Necker Enfants Malades in Paris. Professor Bond currently works in Ireland and leads the collaborative paediatric leukemia research programme between Systems Biology Ireland at UCD and the National Children's Cancer Service at Children's Health Ireland in Crumlin. He also leads the SALAMA study that examines childhood genetic mutations and leukemia treatment in Tanzania. Professor Bond is our guest on This Medical Life podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Jonathan, how common is Burkitt lymphoma?
Yeah, well, luckily, like a lot of blood cancers, these are extremely rare diseases. So in Ireland, there's probably about 20 cases of Burkitt lymphoma a year in all ages. And in the National Children's Cancer Service, we maybe see between 3 and 5 a year. Having said that, they are rare diseases overall, but this is the commonest type of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in children. And then there's peaks later on in adults. But thankfully, overall, these are quite rare to see.
When you read about Burkitt lymphoma and other kinds of lymphomas, we often hear about B symptoms. Now, what are they and how useful are they?
Yeah, so B symptoms comes from a very old term, I suppose. So there was A and B, and A was absence of symptoms, and B just meant there were symptoms. So B symptoms are symptoms like sweating, high temperatures, and weight loss. So I suppose they're useful. They're most useful, I suppose, before the patient presents to the haematology service in really earmarking people who might have something more serious. So I guess for a general practitioner, for example, who would see cases of blood cancer extremely rarely, but they see hundreds of people coming through with maybe, swollen lymph glands or other viral symptoms, then in that case, symptoms like B symptoms might give a clue that something more serious might be going on. So I think they're important at that stage.
Now, looking at Burkitt lymphoma classification, they're now put into 3 categories, and maybe even more since my last reading. They put it into endemic, immunodeficient, and sporadic Burkitt lymphoma. Is there a difference between these diseases?
Yeah, so I guess endemic was the type that was originally described by Denis Burkitt. So this really arises mainly along the malaria belt in Africa and other parts of the world. very much linked to Epstein-Barr virus. So these cases are positive pretty much in 100% of cases. And I suppose the classic presentation would be with tumours around the jaw or neck area, or also in the abdomen, whereas in other countries, so for example in Europe, in Ireland and in Australia, we see sporadic cases. So these are much less likely to be associated with EBV, so it's only present in about 20 to 40% of cases. More likely to have an abdominal mass, or maybe again a head and neck mass. And with immunodeficient cases that you mentioned, so historically this would have been most closely associated with HIV infection. This is less common now, but we see it, I suppose, in the childhood context. We see immunodeficient cases related to children who've maybe had a transplant. So sometimes with post-transplant lymphoproliferative disorder, this kind of a Burkitt phenotype. So that would be where we would see that. And again, in those cases, EBV is positive in about 20 to 40%, and is a very uncertain link to the disease.
Now, how important is staging in all of this?
Yeah, so staging is really important, firstly, to define what treatment the patient should get, and also to identify cases that might be at risk of tumour lysis syndrome. So this is where if there's a lot of tumour on board at the start of chemotherapy treatment, all the tumour cells can burst and release all their contents, and that can cause a lot of issues with kidney failure and things like that. So they're the two reasons why it's important, and the stage really dictates what treatment the patient will get.
Now, is there any molecular markers that you use for diagnosis or treatment?
Yeah, so I guess the kind of pathognomonic characteristic of Burkitt lymphoma is that you get translocations involving the c-Myc oncogene. So this is I'm sure most of your audience will have heard, it's a very strong oncogene which is on chromosome 8. And what happens is that gets activated in Burkitt lymphoma. So this is really the classic way an oncogene gets activated in blood cancers, is that you get an error in DNA recombination, and basically MYC gets stuck to a part of the DNA it shouldn't be stuck to. So in this case, it gets stuck to immunoglobulin genes. So usually the immunoglobulin heavy chain on chromosome 14, less commonly immunoglobulin light chain locus on chromosome 22. And when that happens, so it's normally not turned on, it gets stuck to something that drives the expression of itself, and that's kind of the root cause of the lymphoma. So that's used in diagnosis. So that's diagnosed with fluorescence in situ hybridization, or FISH, and that's really pathognomonic, not positive in 100% of cases, but it's really a key molecular marker for diagnosis.
I also came across the term high risk and low risk Burkitt lymphoma. Can you tell me what the difference, or how we sort that out?
In Ireland, at least, we follow the UK Childhood Cancer and Leukemia Group guidelines. So that actually classifies 3 risk groups, so high, intermediate and low. And that's really based around staging and some other markers. So it's kind of complicated. I would always have to look at what the staging actually is. And as I think I mentioned in my emails, I'm very much more on the research side now. So I'm out of practice with a lot of these things. But broadly, it relates to a low stage is kind of a low amount of disease, let's say. There's parameters around whether a mass has been resected or not, and where the mass is. The intermediate stage kind of falls into a slightly less, a slightly more bulky disease, I guess, but that does not have an elevated LDH, so lactate dehydrogenase, which has to be less than twice the upper limit of normal. And basically, high risk is everyone else, and that includes cases that have infiltration of the bone marrow or the central nervous system. So over 5% infiltration of either of those, and that's very much a kind of a marker for more aggressive disease that needs more treatment. So really going by those categories, the treatment is dictated by that. So the treatment background backbone is fairly similar. So with with most of the lymphoid disorders, it's variations of cyclophosphamide, vincristine, and steroids. And then as the kind of risk goes up, the treatment intensity goes up. So you get more agents, more intense agents. And then with the high risk disease, you also get addition of rituximab, which is an anti-CD20 antibody according to the guidelines that we follow here in Ireland.
So you mentioned some of the therapies. Do we have targeted therapies for Burkitt?
Yeah, so I guess rituximab is the only targeted therapy that's in routine use. So for any of your listeners that aren't familiar with this is a type of immune treatment, which of course is very exciting in blood cancers in general. And this is an antibody that's directed against CD20, which is, very characteristic of B cells. So the way that works is it binds the lymphoma cell, and then that allows the basically our own immune system to clear it. So as I said, the immune treatments are very exciting in blood cancers at the moment, particularly in acute lymphoblastic leukemia. But for the moment, rituximab is kind of the only targeted treatment that's in routine use right now.
And what is the prognosis for patients who are diagnosed with Burkitt lymphoma?
Extremely good for children and young people who are diagnosed in, I guess, more well-off countries like Western Europe and Australia. So people here would have an expectation of, over 90% cure. So it's these are diseases that grow extremely quickly. But the good thing about tumours growing really quickly is that they're more sensitive to chemotherapy. So actually they're really chemosensitive diseases. Very high chance of cure. Unfortunately, if the disease is resistant or relapses, then the outlook is really, really poor, and we don't have good treatments for that at the moment. Unfortunately, I think your listeners will have heard a lot about Denis Burkitt and his history and everything he learned about Burkitt lymphoma in Africa, and we've benefited from that in the global West, and unfortunately people in Africa still have a poorer outlook. So the survival there is maybe more in the order of kind of 60% in sub-Saharan Africa, and lower for children with bone marrow or CNS disease. That's maybe down as low as 30%. So obviously in Africa there's a lot of challenges with delivering intensive chemotherapy, and unfortunately they have not benefited as much as we have from Denis Burkitt's discoveries. It's sad to say.
In discussing patient care with patients in Africa, can you tell us about the Little Princess Trust Project and the Salama study that you were doing?
Salama it stands for Studying Acute Leukemia Mutations in Africa, but Salama is also a Swahili word, which I think doesn't really translate very well into English. So it's kind of a variant of a lot of words you'd hear in other languages, I suppose. But the closest translation is kind of like, all is well, or in Ireland we'd say like it's grand. It's very similar to that. So kind of hard to define, just kind of a good warm feeling, I suppose. So that's what the Salama study is. And this really came about because of a long-term collaboration between Ireland and Tanzania, and a lot of that is down to a very good friend of mine, Dr. Trish Scanlon. So we were junior doctors actually together on the wards in the Irish National Children's Cancer Service almost 20 years ago now. So time flies, and while I've been off doing research, she went to Africa and went to Tanzania and set up the public childhood cancer treatment service there for the country. So it's really been amazing what she's done. So throughout all that time, there's been a lot of interaction with Children's Health Ireland in Crumlin, and a lot of help and support from Crumlin in terms of diagnosis and training, education, etc. So that's been ongoing for a number of years, and Trish has really made incredible strides in improving the outlook of children in Tanzania with blood cancers and other cancers, solid tumours as well. And I guess the next stage of that is that she's really driven a lot of research collaborations with us and with other institutions across the world, like Oxford University and some institutions in America. So we talked about, what we could do to help on the research side, and we came up with this idea of the Salama study, which is about delivering genomics to children with cancer in Africa. So when I say genomics, I mean sequencing of the DNA So by whole exome sequencing in that case, where we get the sequence of all the genes in the genome, and also RNA sequencing, which gives you information about potentially gene fusions, which are important in blood cancers, and also gene expression, which is interesting for the biology. So the SALAMA study has been ongoing for a couple of years now. We've this been supported financially by the Little Princess Trust, which is a UK-based charity who have been, very supportive of what we're doing. It's really a big collaboration between, we're obviously working on it, but absolutely critical involvement from the local team in Mumbai National Hospital. So a number of people that have been, done all the work on the ground and really made this happen. And also collaboration with partners in Oxford University who set up a laboratory in Dar es Salaam that has helped us to do some of the more sophisticated techniques with extracting DNA and extracting RNA. So at the moment, we're working on analyzing the sequencing data. So the main person doing that is a clinical fellow in my group called Dr. Peter McCarthy, who's also a consultant in Children's Health Ireland at Crumlin. So we're waiting on the results any day now, and it's an exciting moment. So we're hoping to, by the end of the study, to have sequenced about 60 cases of blood cancer, and this will really be the first time ever that anyone has done this kind of sequencing in Tanzania and really almost in all of sub-Saharan Africa. So it'll be very exciting to get the results.
Do you expect to find many differences in the genomes or the output from children there and here?
I think so. So we do know that biologically these cases are a bit different. So you have slightly different distribution of cases. So in Ireland and Australia, in children you mostly see B-ALL, whereas and then T-ALL and AML are less common. Whereas if you look in Tanzania, it's really shifted that most of the cases, there's much more of a shift towards AML, and there's a higher rate of T-ALL than we'd see here. So that suggests that biologically it's a bit different, and maybe that relates to this idea that some of B-ALL is around different immune responses that we have in the Western world, I guess. So that's one reason to think it'll be different. And I think also we know a bit from genomic studies that there's some differences in genetic polymorphisms that might predispose to leukemia a bit differently in African populations. So it's kind of hard to know for certain because a lot of the information, there's not too much information, and we know that a lot of these genomic studies that go on across the world are very biased towards Western populations. So we don't have really good hard information about these DNA changes in African in people of African origin. So, but I think there's enough kind of data out there to believe that we will see patterns that are a bit different. So, I suspect a lot of it will be the same, and we find the same patterns that we see elsewhere. But I think we will see some important differences. And really, the point of that is that we're trying to work towards using this information so that the diagnosis on the ground can be better for these children in future. And then the other part I should have mentioned as well, actually, is the second part of the study is really to use this information, to use some of the computational techniques that we're employing in Systems Biology Ireland to try and work out some Achilles heels in the tumour makeup and maybe design better treatments and potentially repurpose treatments that already exist for these children in Africa.
Jonathan, it's really hard not to reflect on how, at the time of recording, certain global leaders are reducing all countries in the world to black and white cardboard cutouts of all good and all bad. And yet the SALAMA study is just one of, I'm sure, millions of examples of micro connections between continents and countries where good humans are getting on and doing something to further our plight as humankind. So I just want to add that as a little note to this record. But in closing, do you have any final thoughts or advice for doctors, for GPs listening in?
Yeah, well, I'd advise everyone to watch Éanna's film when it comes out in Australia. It's very good, and I think it's I think as doctors, I think it's always important for us to get the patient perspective. I think, although many doctors see patients every day, I think it's easy to lose sight of that. And I think the other thing from Burkitt's story is really the idea that curiosity is so important. So, he made all these discoveries on the basis of scientific curiosity and observation. And I think all doctors should be aware of that, and just, even if you're not doing research yourself, just to understand the importance of research. And if you see something that's clinically interesting, just trying to get to the bottom of that, either yourself or in collaboration with other people, because there's so much we don't know about so many diseases, and we've so much progress to make.
Professor Jonathan Bond, thank you for being part of This Medical Life.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
We continue our discussion now with Éanna Mac Cana as we reflect on the personal element of the documentary, of his journey. One of the aspects that I love near the end of the documentary, Dr Travis Brown keeps talking about it non-stop, the focus on Olive Burkitt, Denis's wife. Was that intentional from the outset, or was that just something you came across?
It definitely developed as I was researching and writing and interviewing for the film. It wasn't, I wouldn't have been aware of Olive Burkitt in the initial stages, but as I got to know the Burkitt family, Olive and Denis's 3 daughters, who have been so kind to me in this whole process, they started talking about their mother, and they also gave me these cassettes that were recorded by the Imperial War Museum, a collection of interviews with Olive Burkitt. What was great about these interviews, it wasn't the interviewer wasn't going in with the kind of angling it through Denis. These were actually just about Olive. They were about her experiences primarily at war, because she was a nurse during the Second World War, and that's actually when she met Denis and when they married. But it started to really develop after listening to these recordings and Olive Burkitt beginning to reveal her, really traumatic experiences during the Second World War. And just these like larger than life sort of statements that she was making, I really connected to as I was making, this really personal film as well. But yeah, no, it just really emerged from the making of the film in a really natural way. And it's probably the aspect of the film that I would be like most proud of, to be honest, is because she's so important in this story, like she's a really interesting person, an individual, but she was hugely important in the story of Burkitt's lymphoma, but she wouldn't have been mentioned in the medical literature, because she wasn't involved in the actual active research, but she was the emotional anchor for Denis as he went about his incredible research work. Yeah, no, it felt right to, do her justice, and also what was so fascinating about Olive was the life that she lived after Denis passed away, and she started to really gain a deeper sense of identity, I think, within herself, and that was, I think, hugely important to kind of signal towards in the film. I love writing about Olive and being able to shine a light on her in the film.
Well, there's one story that I love, because you see Olive, and there's I think it was a dream that she had. Now, they're part of a missionary couple, so Denis and her went across to Uganda as part of the church missionary. And then she has a dream where she's at home and there's a knock at the door, and she opens the door and it's Jesus. And her response is, "No, Denis isn't here." And the response is, "I'm not here for Denis, I'm here for you." And I think that moment you sit there and just go, that was her response. She was, I think, experience of her husband going off on these adventures, and she felt, I think, struggled with loneliness and depression, and you just don't even think about that when someone's gallivanting about, saving the world, and then there's someone at home looking at children. Did that strike you?
Yeah, no, it did. It was so powerful, Jesus, even like thinking about it now. Yeah, no, that was really powerful for me. An interviewing Judy Burkitt about that, Dennis's daughter, was hugely powerful as well. Yeah, she was just so important, I really connected with it because I was making this film and there had been so many people there for me, in the background, who were so important. And it felt like what I was looking at sometimes was my own situation, whether it was like in like personal relationships that I was going through, and then seeing, what Dennis was doing and how Olive sometimes would suffer as a result of that, was something that I kind of hugely connected with. And yeah, it was really powerful. And that and the kind of faith that she started to go deeper and deeper into, it was really educational. It kind of not educational, but it was just very profound. And like beautiful to see that there are these kind of chapters to life, and the resilience that she showed, and she was able to kind of transcend those things and find this really deep faith in this final chapter of her life after Dennis had passed, after so much of her life had been dedicated to, serving him and his purpose, and how much his purpose helped everybody. She was able to really begin to find her own sort of calling. So yeah, that was hugely important. Sorry, I didn't mean to get so emotional.
That's fine. One of the people that you mention in the documentary is your father encouraged you to take a creative approach to your diagnosis. Did that help?
Yeah, big time. I basically come from a creative family. My mum and dad are both artists. So I just kind of grew up with this sort of creative environment around me, and they would use creativity, whether it's painting for my dad, or my mum would mainly draw, but she does like sculpture stuff as well. They use it as a kind of way to express, just their own thoughts and feelings, which are of difficult things that they've gone through. So I think just growing up with that kind of culture in the house, and then it was just a kind of natural way for me to kind of, articulate what was going on. But a lot of it didn't really come to me until after hospital. I was doing things in hospital, but it was actually after hospital that things started to become more kind of real. It felt like, and more, there were more kind of, I guess, demons at work or whatever, it was, so no, creativity is a massive theme in the film. Obviously something that I discovered that Dennis actually had within him as well, and not something that people would maybe associate with him, but this kind of creative mind that he had in tackling medical obstacles was fascinating. So I just kind of wanted to highlight this kind of parallel, and creativity as a kind of tool, not only for me as someone who's gone through Burkitt's lymphoma, as a kind of way of kind of dealing with like traumatic things, but for Dennis in actually solving the obstacles that came with figuring out a cure and what was causing this cancer, like through creative thinking, through deductive thinking, and observation, things like that. Yeah.
So has this planted the seed for other medical documentaries, or you've had enough and you're going to go into insects and, something completely different?
I think I might need a break from that. I'm still kind of burnt out from making the film. But there was actually an interest, and I started to learn about the discovery of the Epstein-Barr virus, which I do touch on in the film, because obviously the discovery of Burkitt's lymphoma led to the discovery of Epstein-Barr. But the chances of the Epstein-Barr virus being discovered, I couldn't get into in my film because I didn't have time, but I thought it was really fascinating, and there was definitely a film in that. So maybe there's that.
Éanna Mac Cana, thank you so much for being part of This Medical Life.
Thanks very much, Rob.
This Medical Life is recorded in the Talked About Marketing Studios in Adelaide. For show notes and more information about the podcast, visit thismedicallife.com.au. You can contact the hosts on social media. Dr. Travis Brown can be found on X. His username is @Dr. Travis Brown. That's Dr. Travis Brown. And Steve Davis can be found on LinkedIn. Go to linkedin.com/IN/The Real Steve Davis. This has been a PathNotes Proprietary Limited production.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.